I was 19 years old when the doctor saw the marks around my mouth and whispered in horror, "My God, who did this to you?" For nearly 2 decades, my grandfather kept me silent with threats that froze me with fear. The whole town thought I was mute from birth. The truth was far worse. Hi, my dear friends. What a joy to have you here with me again. Get comfortable, pour yourself a cup of coffee, because today's story is one of those you need to sit down and listen to carefully. My name is Elizabeth, but everyone calls me Beth. I'm 67 years old and blessed with a good life, and I live here in Port Haven, South Carolina. It's a small coastal town right on the water where the ocean meets the rivers. Today, I'm here in my kitchen, preparing a batch of cheese biscuits to sell at the Saturday Farmers Market. Just smell that delicious aroma of cheese baking, honey. This wood stove is a treasure I got from my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, when she moved to the city. Every Saturday, I wake up early, light the fire, and spend the whole morning baking biscuits, cornbread, and butter cookies. It's my livelihood, you know. An honest income that helps me pay the bills and still have some left over to spoil my grandchildren. I started with these biscuits about 5 years ago when my pension started getting tight. At first, it was just for the neighbors, but people liked them so much they started ordering. Today, I have regular customers at the market, thank God. I wake up at 4 in the morning every Saturday, prepare everything, and by 7, I'm already at the town square setting up my little stand. People already know me. Here comes Miss Beth with her biscuits. It's a joy, my dear. Being able to support my home with my own hands, without depending on anyone, after everything I've been through, that's priceless. Here in my kitchen is a sacred little corner. The walls are light blue that I painted myself last year. I have my containers of ingredients all organized on the shelf. Flour, cornmeal, grated cheese, everything in its place. The window stays open and that ocean breeze comes in and perfumes the whole house. Every now and then, the grandkids show up here asking to lick the mixing bowl. I pretend to scold them, but deep down, I love this commotion of children in the house. And you, my dear friends who are watching me now, tell me here in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And at what time of day did you find this video? Early in the morning with breakfast, during lunch break, or already in the late afternoon, relaxing a bit? I always read every comment you leave, and it warms my heart to know there are people from so many different places listening to this grandma's stories. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of kindness. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, click that red button down there. Turn on the notification bell too, because there's a new story for you every week. You know, my dears, looking at this life of mine today, so peaceful and blessed, sometimes I even pinch myself to see if it's real. Because there was a time when I thought I would never know this peace. I was young, very young, when I lived through something that marked me in a way you can't even imagine. It was a situation that stole my voice in a way that even today, when I think about it, I feel a tightness in my chest. It wasn't a disability, my dear. It was fear. A fear so great that it made me swallow my words before they even left my mouth. Today, I tell this story because I know there might be someone out there on the other side of the screen going through something similar. Someone who is silent, not because they want to be, but because they're afraid. And I want that person to know we can get out of this darkness. I am living proof of that. But to get here, I need to go back to the beginning, to that Port Haven of the 1950s, when I was just a little girl with frightened eyes and a family that carried secrets too heavy for any child to bear. I was born in 1958, right here in Port Haven. My mother, Sarah, was a frail young woman with weak health who died of childbirth fever 6 months after I was born. My father, Robert, was a fisherman who worked at my paternal grandfather's seafood shop. He was a quiet man, of few words, who woke up before sunrise to go to sea. They say he never recovered from my mother's death. 2 years after she passed, my father drowned in a storm at sea. I was only 2.5 years old. I have no memory of him, only the stories they told me. That's how I ended up in my grandfather Frank's hands. He was a widower too. My grandmother Margaret had died of cancer years before. My grandfather was in his mid-50s when he took over raising me. He was a big man, with broad shoulders, huge calloused hands from pulling nets. He owned St. Peter's Seafood, the most famous in Port Haven. It was right on the dock, an old wooden building painted blue and white with a big sign everyone knew. I grew up with the smell of fish, salt, and sea. We lived in the back of the seafood shop in a simple 2-story building. Downstairs was the business, refrigerated counters full of fresh catch, styrofoam boxes, ice everywhere. Upstairs were 3 small bedrooms, a little living room, and a cramped kitchen. My room was the smallest, just fit a twin bed and an old dresser. The window faced the river, and at night I slept listening to the sound of water hitting the rocks. My grandfather was known throughout town. Mr. Frank from the seafood shop, people called him. He had a reputation as an honest, hard worker, even religious. Every Sunday he went to the 7 o'clock service, always sat in the same pew, on the left side. After service, he'd stand at the church door chatting with people, laughing, making jokes. He had that good man demeanor that everyone respected. The town ladies would say, "Poor Mr. Frank, widowed and still had to raise his granddaughter alone. What a man of character." But inside that house, away from the town's eyes, my grandfather was different. Not that he beat me much when I was a small child. It wasn't that. It was something else. It was a way of looking, a way of speaking softly, very close to my ear, with that thick voice that made me freeze inside. From a very young age, I learned that there were things we didn't talk about, things that happened in that house that should stay within those walls. I remember at 6, 7 years old, I was already working at the seafood shop. After school, I studied at Roosevelt Elementary, near downtown. I had to go straight to the shop to help. My grandfather made me clean the floor, organize the empty boxes, carry ice. "Lazy people don't eat in my house," he'd say. "Those who don't work have no right to anything." I was a child, but I already carried weight like a grown person. The other children from school played in the street after class. I saw them playing kickball in the little square, flying kites in the field, swimming in the creek. I wanted so much to play too, honey, but my grandfather wouldn't let me. "You don't have time for that nonsense," he'd say. "You need to learn to work. Life isn't a game." And I obeyed, silent, afraid of that heavy look he gave me when I questioned anything. I had a little friend at school, Mary Lou. She lived in a yellow house near the church, had a big family. There were 8 siblings, all crammed into that little house, but they lived laughing, making noise. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, made sweets, fudge, and peanut brittle to sell at the market. I loved when Mary Lou invited me to her house. There it was joy, it was children's noise, it was delicious food on the table. But my grandfather almost never let me go. "You're not going to be wandering around out there," he'd say. "A child's place is at home, helping their grandfather." There was one time, I must have been about 8 years old, when I went to Mary Lou's house without asking permission. We were playing with dolls in her backyard when suddenly I looked at the gate and saw my grandfather standing there, staring at me. My blood ran cold. He didn't say anything in front of Mary Lou's family. He just made a sign with his head for me to leave. I said goodbye quickly and followed him. The way back home was in silence. When we arrived, he locked the shop door from the inside, took me upstairs, and whispered very softly in my ear, "Disobedient children learn the hard way, Elizabeth. Family secrets don't leave here. Loose lips sink ships." And he gave me a pinch on the arm that left a purple mark for days. I was so afraid of him, my dears. So afraid I can't even explain. It wasn't just fear of being hit. It was fear of something worse, something I couldn't define, but that was always there, like a shadow. He controlled everything, who I talked to, where I went, what I ate. If I cried, he'd say, "Stop that crying. Crybabies are good for nothing in this life." If I complained about being tired, he'd respond, Tiredness is for the weak. You're going to have to endure worse things. At school, the teachers sometimes asked if everything was okay at home. I always said yes, with a forced little smile. How was I going to tell? Tell what? That my grandfather scared me? That he made me work like an adult? That he said those strange things about keeping secrets? I had no words for that. And even if I did, fear silenced me. At 10 years old, I started noticing strange things at the seafood shop. There was a basement under the establishment that my grandfather always kept locked. "It's storage," he'd say. "Children don't go in there." But I heard noises at night, noises of heavy things being dragged, noises of machinery running, and every once in a while, a different smell came from there. It wasn't the smell of fish, it was something else. Something I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach turn. My grandfather had many friends. Strange men who arrived at dawn, entered through the back door, went down to the basement. They stayed there for hours. When they left, my grandfather gave me that look that meant, "You didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything, and you're not going to say anything." And I pretended I really hadn't seen anything, pretended I didn't exist, that I was invisible. I grew up like this, my dears, between fear and silence. A girl who learned too early that life could be hard, that words could be dangerous, and that obeying was the only way to survive. When I turned 12 and entered adolescence, I was no longer a child like the others. I was a girl old inside, tired, frightened, always looking around, afraid of saying too much or doing something wrong. And things, my dear ones, would only get worse from there. When I entered adolescence, things changed in a way I didn't expect. My grandfather became even more controlling, even more demanding. At 13, 14 years old, I worked at the seafood shop from sunrise to sunset. I woke up at 4 in the morning to help prepare the fresh fish that arrived from the boats. My fingers were always cut from the scales, bruised from carrying so many ice boxes. Girls my age were starting to dress up, to date, to dream about dances and pretty dresses. All I knew was the smell of fish and the exhaustion in my bones. At school, I was quiet. Too quiet. The teachers thought I was shy, but it wasn't just shyness, my dears. It was real fear. Fear of talking too much, of accidentally telling something I shouldn't. I had learned the lesson of keeping secrets so well that I became a shadow. I passed through the hallways almost invisible, didn't participate in group work, didn't go to little parties. When there were parent meetings, my grandfather went and put on a whole show of being a dedicated grandfather. "Elizabeth is shy, but she's a good girl, obedient," he'd tell the teachers, and they believed him, poor things. At 16, I dropped out of school. My grandfather said I didn't need to study anymore, that women only needed to know how to count and read recipes. "You're going to work at the seafood shop anyway. Why waste time at school?" And I didn't have the courage to contradict him. Part of me was even relieved not to have to pretend normalcy in front of my classmates anymore. It was around this time, at 16, 17 years old, that I started noticing more things. My grandfather's friends appeared more frequently, always at dawn, always entering through the back door. And sometimes, my dears, they brought people. Strange people. Tourists mostly. Men and women who were passing through town, who had stopped to see the beaches, whom no one would miss too soon. My grandfather was smart. He chose well. People traveling alone. People whose car had broken down on the highway. "Come sleep here. Tomorrow we'll sort it out," he'd say, all helpful. And the person, poor thing, thinking they'd found a good Samaritan, would accept. They'd enter that seafood shop without imagining they would never leave alive. I heard everything from my room, the footsteps going down the stairs to the basement, the heavy door being locked, and then, hours later, the screams. Muffled screams that made me cover my ears and pray quietly, asking God to make me deaf, make me sleep, make me forget. But I never forgot. Each scream was engraved in my head like a branding iron. Early in the morning, before the shop opened, my grandfather would wake me up. "Elizabeth, come down here." His voice was calm, as if he were calling me for breakfast. But when I went downstairs and saw the basement open, my stomach turned. There was blood on the cement floor. There were pieces, things I didn't want to identify. And he'd give me a bucket with bleach, a broom, and say, "Clean everything, and don't leave any trace." The first time he made me clean, I had just turned 18. It was March 1976. I went down those stairs trembling, and when I saw what was there, I vomited. I vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach. My grandfather stood there watching me, arms crossed, waiting for me to finish. When I stopped vomiting, he said in that low, cold voice, "Now clean your vomit too, and learn to hold it better next time." I cleaned. I cleaned crying, shaking, disgusted with myself. But I cleaned. Because I knew that if I refused, if I tried to run, I would be next. I was sure of that. My grandfather never said it directly, but his look said everything. "You're an accomplice now, Elizabeth. If I go down, we go down together." There was one night, a few months after that first time, when I was in my room trying to sleep, when I heard the door creaking. It was my grandfather. He came in, sat on the edge of my bed, and just stared at me in the dark. I pretended to be asleep, but he knew I was awake. "Elizabeth," he whispered, "have you been thinking about telling anyone anything?" My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. I shook my head desperately. "No, Grandpa, no, I swear." He turned on the lamplight. In his hand was a box, the tackle box. He opened it slowly, and inside were fishing hooks, sinkers, and those spools of transparent nylon fishing line, thick, resistant. He picked up a piece of line and stretched it between his fingers. Made that little sound of line being tested. "You know what happens to fish that open their mouths too much, Elizabeth?" he asked, running the line between his fingers. "Fish that open their mouths die on the hook. Loose lips sink ships, and a sewn mouth doesn't spill any secrets." He grabbed a thick needle, the kind used for making nets, and threaded the line through the hole. He came close to me, grabbed my chin hard. I was paralyzed with terror. He brought the needle close to my lips, just touching, not piercing, but close enough for me to feel the cold tip. "If I find out you've opened your mouth, Elizabeth, I'm going to sew that mouth of yours, very slowly, stitch by stitch, just like we fix torn fishing nets. You'll become truly mute. Understand?" I couldn't speak. I could only tremble and cry silently. He let go of my face and put the needle back in the box. "Good. I see we understand each other." And he left the room, leaving the door open and the light on. From that day on, I was never the same. Something died inside me. I started talking less and less. With the shop customers, I would just nod my head. With the neighbors, I would look away. On the street, I walked with my head down, as if carrying the weight of a terrible secret bent my spine. The town started talking. "Frank's granddaughter Elizabeth is getting strange, isn't she? Poor thing. I think she has some problem in her head. They say she's a bit spacey, hardly talks at all." And my grandfather, clever as always, started using this in his favor. He spread to everyone that I had been born with a little speech problem, that I was very shy, almost mute, and people believed it. After all, why would a grandfather lie about his own granddaughter? I became Old Frank's mute granddaughter. That's what they called me, some with pity, others with curiosity, but all with that certainty that I was disabled in some way. And I let them think that. It was easier than explaining the truth I couldn't tell, the truth that was locked inside me tighter than any fishing line could lock. The months went by. I kept cleaning the basement, kept carrying that horrible secret. My grandfather continued with his business. The shop continued packed because my grandfather had started selling a new delicacy, a special recipe he said was a family secret, meat pies. People lined up to buy. They said it was the best pie in the region, that the meat was so tender, so different, so tasty. I knew what was in those pies. I knew and couldn't say. Every time I saw someone buying, eating, praising, I felt nausea rising. But what could I do? Open my mouth and have it sewn shut? Report and become the next victim of the basement? At 19, I was a ghost living in a person's body. I worked like a machine, ate little, slept poorly. I had nightmares every night, nightmares with screams, with blood, with needles piercing my mouth. I woke up sweaty, with my heart racing, and stared at the ceiling until the sun rose. I thought I would live like this forever. That I would die in that seafood shop, carrying those secrets, without ever having truly lived. But God, my dears, God had other plans, and those plans were going to start unfolding in a way I never imagined. Starting with a simple sore throat and a new doctor in town who was going to ask the right questions. Those months between my 18th and 19th years were the darkest of my life, my dears. Dark in a way that not even sunlight could brighten. I woke up every day with that weight on my chest, that feeling that I was carrying the world on my shoulders. But it wasn't the world. It was a secret that weighed more than boxes of ice, more than nets full of fish. My grandfather noticed I was different, more silent, more frightened. And he liked that. The more fear I had, the more power he felt he had over me. He started testing me, to see how far I could take it without breaking. There was a Saturday afternoon. It was market day in the square. The seafood shop was full of people buying for Sunday lunch. My grandfather was at the counter, smiling, making his pitch. "Take the special meat pie, Mrs. Johnson. You'll see how the whole family will ask for seconds." And people bought, excited. The line never ended. I was in the back of the store, packing purchases, when an elderly lady, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me by the arm. She had that worried grandma way, kind eyes, smell of lavender. "Beth, dear," she whispered, "are you okay? You're so thin, so pale. Is your grandfather taking proper care of you?" I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time in months, someone had asked if I was okay. Someone had really looked at me, had seen beyond the mute girl. For a second, just 1 second, I thought about speaking. I thought about whispering, "Help me. Get me out of here." But when I opened my mouth, the words didn't come out. I looked over Mrs. Patterson's shoulder and saw my grandfather staring at me. He had stopped serving, was standing there, arms crossed, looking at me with that look. That look that said, "Be careful what you're going to say." I lowered my head and just nodded, yes, that everything was fine. Mrs. Patterson sighed, squeezed my hand affectionately, and left. And I stood there, wanting to scream, but unable to make a peep. That night, after the shop closed, my grandfather came up to my room. I was lying down, trying to sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and was silent for a while. Then he spoke in that low voice that gave me chills all over. "You thought about saying something to Mrs. Patterson today, didn't you?" I froze. How did he know? "I saw it in your eye, Elizabeth. I saw you thinking. I saw you almost opening your mouth." He ran his hand through my hair, in a gesture that should have been affectionate, but gave me chills. "You know what happens if you talk, right? You know nobody's going to believe a crazy mute? And you know that if someone does believe, I'm going to deny everything, and you'll disappear, just like the others disappeared." He got up, went to the dresser, opened the drawer, and took out the tackle box. When had he put that box in my room? He opened it, grabbed the nylon line, and left it on my headboard. "Just so you remember," he said, and left. I spent the night awake, staring at that line. It shone in the faint light coming through the window, and I swore I heard it snapping, as if it were being pulled, as if it were about to lasso my mouth shut. The days got worse and worse. My grandfather started bringing more visitors. Almost every week there was someone new. And every time, early in the morning, he'd wake me up. "Elizabeth, come down." And I'd go down to that hell, to that basement that smelled of bleach and something else I didn't want to identify. I stopped eating properly. Food wouldn't go down. It got stuck in my throat, as if my body was rejecting everything. I lost so much weight that my clothes became loose. People commented, "Is Elizabeth sick?" Poor thing, must be depression. A young woman can't be like this, so faded. But nobody did anything. Nobody went beyond comments. And my grandfather continued with that perfect facade of caring grandfather. "She's sensitive," he'd say. "She has nervous breakdowns. Women's things. You know how it is." There was one night, it was almost dawn, when I woke up to noise. I slowly went down the stairs and saw my grandfather talking with two men at the back door. They were bringing someone, a young man, appearing to be in his early 20s, stumbling, looking drugged or very drunk. My grandfather looked up and saw me on the stairs. "Elizabeth, go back to your room. This isn't your business." But I had already seen that young man's face. It was Tommy Wilson, son of the grocery store owner on the corner. He had traveled to Atlanta a few days ago and was coming back by car. I had heard his mother, Mrs. Wilson, commenting that he was arriving that week. My heart raced. This was different. It wasn't an unknown tourist. It was someone from town, someone who had family here, someone they would look for. I ran back to my room, locked the door, and stayed there, shaking, hearing the footsteps going down to the basement. I knew what was going to happen, and this time, I knew it wouldn't be easy to hide. Mrs. Wilson would look for her son. The police would investigate. They would ask questions. And early in the morning, when my grandfather woke me up as always, "Elizabeth, come down." I went down with shaky legs. The basement was worse than ever. There was much more evidence. I cleaned crying so much that tears fell on the floor and mixed with the bleach. When I finished and went up, my grandfather was making coffee, calm, as if nothing had happened. "Good work," he said, passing me a cup. "You're getting good at this, fast and efficient." I took the cup with trembling hands. How could he be so cold, so calm? How did he sleep at night? "Beth," he said, looking at me over his cup. "Today Mrs. Wilson is going to come here looking for her son. She's going to ask if we saw him. What are you going to do?" I didn't answer, just looked at him. "You're going to shake your head no, that you didn't see anything, and you're going to lower those eyes like you always do, and nobody's going to suspect anything, because you're the mute girl." The poor thing, and poor things don't hurt anyone. And that's exactly what happened. Mrs. Wilson showed up in the afternoon, desperate, asking if anyone had seen Tommy. My grandfather made that worried face. "What a terrible thing, Mrs. Wilson. No, I didn't see him. Beth, did you see?" And I shook my head no, with my eyes on the floor, like he had told me to. Mrs. Wilson left the shop devastated, and I stood there carrying another weight, another guilt, another secret that was killing me inside. That night, I had the worst nightmare of my life. I dreamed that my mouth was being sewn, stitch by stitch, with fishing line. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to tear out the line, but it was too tight. And when I woke up, with my heart almost jumping out of my chest, I brought my hand to my mouth to make sure it was just a dream. But the feeling continued there. The feeling of being gagged, suffocated, trapped. I didn't know how much longer I could take it. I felt I was at my limit, that something inside me was about to explode or die for good. And that's when, a few days later, I started having a high fever and a sore throat that wouldn't go away. My grandfather, afraid of losing his helper, decided to take me to the health clinic. And it was this decision, my dears, that changed everything. Because at that clinic, there was a new doctor. A doctor who was going to look at me differently. A doctor who was going to ask the right questions and who was going to see what no one had ever seen. The fever started on a Monday morning. I woke up with my throat on fire, feeling like I had swallowed glass shards. My head was throbbing, my whole body ached. Every muscle, every bone was a different pain. I tried to get up to work at the shop, but my legs wouldn't hold me. It was as if I had no strength at all, as if my body had turned to jelly. I fell back on the bed, shivering with cold, even with the March heat outside. The sheets were soaked with sweat in minutes, sticking to my body. My grandfather came up to the room and found me wrapped in the blanket, all sweaty, my teeth chattering. "Get up, Elizabeth. There's work to do." His voice was hard, impatient. But when he got close and touched my forehead, even he was startled. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he had touched hot coals. "You're burning up, girl." He gave me a home remedy, one of those he made with bitter herbs that made me gag, and told me to stay in bed. "Rest today. Tomorrow you'll be better." But I didn't get better. The fever rose higher. On Tuesday, I couldn't even swallow water. When I tried, it was as if my throat had closed. The pain was so bad I cried just thinking about swallowing. On Wednesday, I fainted trying to go to the bathroom. I remember getting out of bed, taking 2 steps, and suddenly everything went black. I woke up on the cold floor, with my grandfather shaking me. "Get up, Elizabeth, get up!" That's when my grandfather started to really worry. Not because he cared about me, no, my dears, but because he needed me. He needed my labor. He needed someone to clean, to be silent, to obey. I saw it in his eyes. It wasn't concern for my life. It was concern about losing the useful tool I was to him. "I'm taking you to the clinic," he said Thursday morning, helping me down the stairs. Each step was suffering. My legs were shaking. My vision was blurred. I could barely walk properly, leaning on him, smelling the strong fish smell he always had stuck to his clothes. "But you're going to be quiet there, you hear?" He squeezed my arm hard, digging in his fingers. "You're not going to talk nonsense. You're only going to open your mouth for the doctor to examine and nothing else, not one more word. You know what happens if you disobey." The way to the health clinic was a blur. I remember the strong sun beating on my face, blinding me. The smell of sea air mixed with the smell of fish. The sound of people on the street, talking, laughing, living their normal lives while I was dying inside. Dying of fever and dying of fear. When we arrived, the waiting room was full. There were mothers with children in their laps, elderly people waiting for appointments, people coughing, people talking. Life happening there, so normal, so different from the hell I lived in. My grandfather sat me in a hard plastic chair and went to talk to the receptionist. I stayed there, staring at the white and green tile floor, feeling the fever consume me. My head was so heavy I could barely keep it up. Around me, people talked, complained about the wait, flipped through old magazines with torn covers. I heard voices, but everything seemed very far away, as if I were underwater, slowly drowning. A small child came up to me, must have been about 3 years old, holding a rag doll. She looked at me with those curious child eyes and asked, "Is the lady sick?" I tried to smile, but couldn't. Her mother came running, took the girl by the hand. "Leave the lady alone. Come here." And looked at me with pity. That look of poor thing, so young and so sick. If she only knew. If anyone there knew what I carried, it wouldn't be pity they'd feel. It would be horror. "Elizabeth Miller?" A gray-haired nurse called my name, reading from a clipboard. My grandfather lifted me by the arm, almost dragging me. My feet barely touched the floor properly. He led me down the narrow hallway, smelling of disinfectant and alcohol, to a small room in the back. It was a small office with an examination table against the wall, covered with white paper, a wooden desk full of papers and forms, and a white cabinet with glass where you could see the shiny medicines and medical instruments. The doctor was young, very young. Must have been about 30 at most. Black wavy hair, thin-framed glasses, impeccable white coat with a badge pinned to the pocket. He had a kind face, attentive brown eyes. He stood up when we entered and extended his hand. "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Harrison. I arrived in town 2 weeks ago. His voice was calm, pleasant. My grandfather shook his hand with that fake smile I knew so well, the smile he used to fool everyone. Mr. Frank from the seafood shop, pleasure. This here is my granddaughter, Elizabeth. She's had a fever that won't go away for 4 days and a very inflamed throat. She can't even swallow water properly. Dr. Harrison looked at me carefully. There was something in his look, a genuine kindness I wasn't used to seeing. It wasn't pity, it was respect, it was humanity. Good afternoon, Elizabeth. I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. Can you sit here on the table, please? I sat down, trembling. The paper on the table made noise, crinkling under me. My grandfather stood to the side, arms crossed, that intimidating presence that made me want to disappear. The doctor began the examination. He washed his hands in the corner sink, dried them, put a thermometer under my arm. 102.5 degrees, he said, frowning. Very high fever. He took my blood pressure with that squeezing cuff, listened to my heart with the cold stethoscope, felt my neck looking for swollen lymph nodes. His fingers were careful, gentle. The lymph nodes are quite swollen. The throat is indeed very inflamed, he said, looking with a pen light. I'm going to need to examine it more closely, see if there's any obstruction or more serious infection. He turned to my grandfather. Mr. Frank, per clinic protocol, I need to ask you to wait outside. It's standard procedure when I examine female patients, especially when a more detailed examination is needed. My grandfather hesitated. I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes narrow. But she's my granddaughter. I'm responsible for her. And she doesn't speak well, doctor. She's a bit troubled in the head, you know how it is. I need to stay to explain things. I understand, sir, but it's clinic protocol. Don't worry, it won't take long. It's just a few minutes. Dr. Harrison kept his tone firm, polite but firm. It wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't going to give in either. My grandfather gave me that look that said, be careful. Very careful what you're going to do in here. Remember the line. Remember what I promised. But he had no choice without seeming too suspicious. He left, but before closing the door, he stopped and looked back one more time, staring at me. The door closed with a dull thud that echoed in the small office. When we were alone, the silence became heavy. Dr. Harrison pulled up the rolling chair and sat in front of me, at my eye level. Elizabeth, he said quietly, in a soft voice that made me want to cry. I've noticed some things since you came in here. I noticed how you shrink when your grandfather speaks. I noticed how you don't look anyone in the eye. I noticed how your shoulders tense when he approaches. And I noticed you haven't said a single word since you came in here. He paused, studying my face. Can you speak? Is there any physical problem, or is there another reason? I felt tears starting to fall. They weren't tears from the fever. They were tears stored up for years, years of forced silence. I wanted to speak. God, how I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everything. But the words were trapped by years of fear, of threats, of terror. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just a broken, painful sigh. It's okay, he said, with infinite patience, taking a tissue from the box on the desk and handing it to me. You don't have to force it. Let's do the exam first, okay? Open your mouth so I can see your throat. I opened my mouth slowly, trembling. He grabbed the small pen light, the kind doctors use, and brought it close. The light illuminated the back of my throat first. I felt the heat of the light, saw its reflection in his glasses. He examined carefully, asking me to say, "Ah," but only a hoarse moan came out. Then he lowered the light, looking at the teeth, searching for any abnormality, examining the tongue. And then he stopped. The light stayed still, illuminating my lips, illuminating the edges of my mouth. He came closer, tilting his head, frowning. His eyes squinted behind his glasses, focusing. I saw the exact moment he realized. I saw confusion turn to understanding, understanding turn to shock, shock turn to horror. He slowly turned off the light, very slowly, and looked me in the eyes. His face was pale, his hands starting to tremble. "Elizabeth," he whispered, and his voice was trembling too. "These marks around your mouth, multiple healed perforations. In a regular pattern, like stitches." He swallowed hard. "This isn't from birth. This isn't an accident. Someone did this intentionally. Someone sewed your mouth shut, didn't they?" The tears exploded. They came out so strong that I started sobbing silently, my whole body shaking. Years of secrets, years of pain, all coming to the surface. He grabbed more tissues, put them in my hand. "Was it your grandfather?" he asked, his voice barely coming out. "Did he do this to you? Is he the one who—" "Elizabeth, for God's sake, I need to know. How long has this been happening?" I couldn't speak. My voice wouldn't come out. It was as if his threat had become real, as if my mouth had really been sewn shut, as if the words were trapped forever. Dr. Harrison stood up quickly, went to the desk, opened the drawer, grabbed a prescription pad and a blue pen. He came back and put everything in my hand, closing my fingers around the pen. "Right," he said, and now there was anger in his voice. Contained anger, righteous anger. "Write what happened. I don't know what it is, but I know it's serious, very serious, and I'm going to protect you. I promise by everything that's sacred. But I need to know the truth to be able to help you. Please, Elizabeth, write." I grabbed the pen with my hand, shaking so much I could barely hold it. I put the pad on my lap. I looked at the blank page, and I started writing. Each word hurt. Each letter was a piece of me being torn out. But I wrote. I wrote fast, afraid my grandfather would come back, afraid the door would open before I finished. My handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but I continued. I wrote 3 sentences. Just 3. But they were the 3 most important sentences of my life. 3 sentences that carried years of horror, of secrets, of death. When I finished, I tore the sheet from the pad. The paper ripped a little on the edge from how much my hand was shaking. I handed it to him. The paper shook violently between my fingers. Dr. Harrison took the paper with both hands, brought it close to his face, started reading. I saw his face change. I saw his eyes widen more and more. I saw the color drain from his cheeks, leaving him white as his coat. I saw his mouth open slightly, in silent shock. He read it once. Then he read it again, as if he didn't believe it, as if he thought he had read it wrong the first time. His hand holding the paper started to tremble, then both hands, then his arms. He stood up suddenly, the chair almost falling backward. He brought his hand to his mouth, his eyes still glued to the paper, incredulous. He took 2 steps back, bumped into the desk, and then he ran to the sink in the corner of the office. He leaned over and vomited. He vomited violently, holding on to the edge of the sink so hard that his knuckles turned white. His whole body contracting, his shoulders shaking. The sound was loud, terrible. He vomited several times as if he were trying to expel the horror he had just read. I stayed there, sitting on the table, the paper on the table crinkling under me, hearing him vomit and knowing there was no going back. The secret was out. After years trapped inside me, suffocating, killing, it had finally come out. And now someone else knew. Someone else carried the weight. But at the same time, I felt such great relief that I almost fainted again. I was no longer alone. When Dr. Harrison stopped vomiting, he stood there, leaning on the sink, breathing heavily. Then he turned on the faucet hard, washed his face several times, throwing water, scrubbing. He grabbed paper towels, dried his mouth, dried his face. His hands were still shaking uncontrollably. He threw the paper towel in the trash, took 3 deep breaths, trying to compose himself. When he turned to me, his eyes were red. I don't know if from vomiting or if he had cried too. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice hoarse, different from before, "you're going to stay here. Don't leave this room for anything. Understand? For anything. I'm going to lock the door. Your grandfather won't come in here, not while I'm alive. I'm calling the police now. This ends today." He picked up the landline phone on the desk, dialed with his fingers still trembling. I heard him speak, fast, urgent, his voice still choked. "I need a squad car at the Central Health Clinic immediately. It's an emergency. No, I can't give details over the phone, but it's urgent, very urgent. It's a matter of life and death. Send the nearest car, for God's sake." When he hung up, I heard loud knocking on the door. It was my grandfather. His voice was different, irritated, suspicious. "What's taking so long in there? Open this door. I want to see my granddaughter now." Dr. Harrison went to the door but didn't open it. He stood there with his hand on the doorknob like a barrier. He spoke through the door, his jaw set. "Mr. Frank, we're still finishing the examination. There are some complications that need attention. You need to wait out there." "What complications? I want to see my granddaughter. Open this door now, or I'm going to complain to the director here." His voice was getting loud, dangerous. "Sir, you're going to have to wait. These are medical procedures that can't be interrupted. The nurse will call you when we're finished." I heard my grandfather cursing on the other side, banging on the door hard, the sound echoing through the office. The glass in the door shook, but Dr. Harrison didn't open it. He leaned against the door as if he were holding it with his own body and didn't move. Then he came back near me, pulled the chair again, sat down, and held my hands. His hands were cold, still trembling, but the grip was firm. "Elizabeth, look at me." I raised my eyes. "It's almost over. You were the bravest person I've ever met in my life. Braver than any adult, than any man. What you did here today, you just saved not only your life, but probably the lives of many other people. Hang on a little longer, just a little longer. The police are already coming, and I'm not going to let him get near you ever again. Never again. Are you hearing me?" And in that moment, my dears, even with fear, and I was still very afraid, my grandfather was out there, banging on the door, cursing, even shaking, even feeling like I was going to faint again. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt hope, a small hope, fragile as a wounded bird, but alive, pulsing, breathing. For the first time in a very, very long time, I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could get out of this alive. That maybe I could have a real life, a life without fear, a life with a voice. The police car arrived in less than 10 minutes. I heard the siren approaching, the sound getting louder and louder until it stopped right at the clinic door. Dr. Harrison let go of my hand and went to the window, peeked through the blinds. "They're here," he said, relieved. "Stay here, Elizabeth. Don't leave here." He unlocked the door and went out, closing it behind him. I heard voices from outside. My grandfather shouting, "What is this about? I didn't do anything. I just want to see my granddaughter." Dr. Harrison's voice, lower but firm. And then other voices, masculine, authoritative. The police officers. I stayed there on the table, trembling, hearing everything muffled through the door. I heard my grandfather being restrained. "Get your hands off me. You have no right. I'm an upstanding citizen of this town." But the police weren't letting him through. Dr. Harrison must have shown the paper, must have told something, because suddenly the police officers' voices changed. Got serious, dangerous. "Mr. Frank, you're going to have to come with us to the station, now." "I'm not going anywhere. This is absurd. My granddaughter is troubled, makes up stories. She's not right in the head." I heard sounds of struggle, handcuffs being put on, my grandfather screaming obscenities. And then the office door opened. It was Dr. Harrison, accompanied by 2 police officers. One was older, gray mustache, well-pressed uniform. The other was young, looking like he had just seen something he didn't want to see. "Miss Elizabeth," the older officer said, removing his cap and holding it respectfully. My name is Officer Davis. I need you to come with us to the station. I need your full statement. Dr. Harrison is coming with you. You're safe now." I got down from the table with shaky legs. Dr. Harrison held me by the arm, supporting me. When we left the office and passed through the hallway, I saw my grandfather. He was handcuffed between two police officers, his face red with rage. When he saw me, his eyes met mine. And for the first time in my life, my dears, I didn't look away. I held his gaze. And what I saw surprised me. He was afraid. For the first time, it was he who was afraid. "You traitorous bitch!" He spat the words. "You're going to regret this. You don't know what you've done." One of the officers pushed him. "Shut up and walk." At the station, they took me to a separate room. There was an old table, 2 chairs, peeling walls. Officer Davis sat next to me, not across from me. I think so as not to intimidate me. He put a recorder on the table. "Elizabeth, I need you to tell everything, from the beginning. I know it's difficult, but it's important. Can you do that?" And for the first time, my dears, after years of being silent, I spoke. My voice came out hoarse, weak, broken from so long without using it, but it came out. Word by word, I told everything. The visitors, the basement, the cleanings, the threats, the fishing line, Tommy Wilson, the meat pies, everything. Officer Davis got paler and paler as I spoke. When I finished, he turned off the recorder with his hand shaking. "My God in heaven," was all he could say. "My God in heaven." They went to the seafood shop that same afternoon. They took a whole team, police officers, forensic experts, even the sheriff went. They broke the padlock on the basement. And what they found there, my dears, confirmed every word I had said. There was the industrial grinder, still with remains. There were tools. There were clothes, documents, belongings of missing people. More than 20 people over 5 years. The news spread through town like wildfire. The next day, nothing else was talked about in Port Haven. Mr. Frank from the seafood shop was a murderer, a monster. People couldn't believe it. But he was so polite, so religious. How can it be? And the worst part, the part that made half the town sick, the meat pies. Those famous, delicious pies that everyone had been eating for years. They weren't fish. They never were. People vomited in the streets when they found out. Mrs. Wilson, when she found out her son had been ground up and sold as food, fainted in the square. They had to call an ambulance. The town was turned upside down. They closed the seafood shop, sealed everything off, put up yellow tape. People passed by and made the sign of the cross, hurried their steps. Children had nightmares. Adults couldn't eat meat for months. My grandfather was arrested. He denied everything at first, said I was lying, that I was crazy. But the evidence didn't lie. The basement didn't lie. The victim's belongings didn't lie. He went to the prison in Columbia, the state capital, because in Port Haven's jail, the other inmates would have killed him the first night. But they killed him anyway, my dears. 2 months after his arrest, an inmate managed to get into his cell. My grandfather was found in the morning, dead. They say it was terrible, that it was painful. I didn't feel sorry. I know I should. I know revenge isn't Christian. But I didn't feel anything, just relief. Relief knowing he would never be able to hurt anyone again. I stayed a few days at Dr. Harrison's house with his wife, Mrs. Helen. She was a teacher, a sweet woman who treated me like a daughter. They had no children and welcomed me with so much affection that I cried every day with gratitude. Dr. Harrison treated me, helped me with the fever, with my throat, with the nightmares. He referred me to a therapist in Charleston, Dr. Walsh, who helped me process everything that had happened. My voice came back gradually. At first it was just whispers, then short sentences. It took months until I could speak normally again. Dr. Walsh said it was trauma, that my brain had learned that speaking was dangerous, so it had blocked speech as protection. "But you're safe now, Elizabeth," she repeated every session. You can speak. Nobody is going to hurt you. The town took a while to accept me again. There were people who looked at me with pity, others with disgust, as if I were my grandfather's accomplice. She knew and didn't say anything, they whispered. How many people died because she stayed quiet? Those words hurt more than anything my grandfather had done, because they were true. I had stayed quiet. Out of fear, yes. Out of terror, yes. But I had stayed quiet. Those were very difficult times, my dears. I had nightmares every night. I woke up sweaty, screaming. I couldn't eat meat. Even today I avoid it. Every time I saw a fishing line, I panicked. Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Helen had the patience of saints with me. They held me when I had crises, made me chamomile tea, reminded me that the worst was over. 6 months after the day everything came out, I was at their house when there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Patterson, that lady who had tried to help me that day at the shop. She came in, hugged me tight, and cried. "Forgive me, my dear," she said. "Forgive me for not insisting. I saw something was wrong. I saw it in your eyes. But I didn't do anything. Forgive me." "It wasn't your fault, ma'am," I said, and my voice was firmer now. It wasn't anyone's fault, except his. Over time, the townspeople forgave me. They understood. They saw that I was a victim too. The biggest victim of all, perhaps, because I had survived carrying that horror. And I survived, my dears. Against all odds, I survived. The mute girl found her voice again. And that voice, today, tells the story so no one forgets, so that no one else stays silent when they should scream. And here I am today, my dears, at 67 years old, still living here in Port Haven. Yes, I stayed. Many people thought I would leave after everything, that I would want to forget, start over somewhere else. But this is my land, and I wasn't going to let that man take this from me too. In the first years after his arrest, it was really difficult. I lived with Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Helen for a while, almost 3 years. They treated me like a daughter, helped me finish my education through a GED program, taught me that I had value, that I was more than what had happened to me. When I turned 22, in 1980, I got a job at a fabric store here in town. Mrs. Carter, the owner, gave me a chance when no one else would. I worked there for 15 years. It was at the store that I met James, my husband. He was a truck driver, would come pick up merchandise to take to other towns. A simple man, hard worker, of few words but with a huge heart. At first I was afraid to get involved with someone, you know? Afraid to tell my story and have him run away. But when I told him, he just hugged me and said, "The past is the past, Beth. What matters is who you are today." We got married in 1985, me at 27 years old. He gave me 3 beautiful children, James Jr., Sarah, I named her after my mother, and Harrison, in honor of the doctor who saved me. Dr. Harrison was Harrison's godfather. He and Mrs. Helen are part of my family to this day. They're quite elderly now. He's 78 years old, retired for a long time, but we visit each other every week. He says I was the most important patient of his life. I say he was my angel on earth. My James died 7 years ago, of a heart attack. It was quick, he didn't suffer, thank God. But it left a huge hole. We had just retired, were making plans to travel, see the country. But God wanted it that way. He was a wonderful husband, always treated me with respect, with affection. He gave me a life I never thought I'd have. Today I live alone in that little house we bought in 1987 near St. Peter's Church. It's small, 3 bedrooms, a little backyard where I have my peach tree and my plants. But it's mine, bought with our sweat, with honest work. Nobody can take that from me. The kids live nearby. Junior is a mechanic, has a shop here in town. Sarah is a nurse at the health clinic, the same one where I went that day in 1977. And Harrison is a history teacher at the high school. All married, all with children. I have 7 grandchildren, my dears. 7 treasures that fill my life with joy. The oldest is 15, the youngest is 3. Every Sunday they come have lunch at my house. The house becomes a party, such commotion. Kids running, yelling, asking for food. It's noise I love to hear. It's for them that I make the biscuits. I started 5 years ago, when my pension started getting tight. At first it was just to have a little extra income, but it became therapy too, you know? Waking up early, lighting the wood stove, kneading the dough, smelling the flour and cheese baking. It's a peace that's good for my soul. Every Saturday, I go to the farmer's market, set up my little stand, chat with customers. There are people who come from other towns just to buy Miss Beth's biscuits. I like my routine. I wake up early, make my coffee, sit on the porch to watch the sunrise. I read the Bible. I learned to have faith again. It took time, but I learned. I do my housework, take care of the yard, watch my soap operas. In the afternoon, there's always someone who shows up, a neighbor for coffee, a grandchild who comes to visit me, Sarah who stops by after work. At night, before sleeping, I give thanks. I give thanks for each peaceful day, for each night I sleep in peace. People sometimes ask me if I still have nightmares. I do, yes, I won't lie. There are nights when I wake up sweaty, dreaming about that basement, about that tackle box. But they're rare now, and I've learned to deal with it. I get up, drink a glass of water, breathe deeply, and remember, that's over. I survived. I won. The seafood shop was demolished years ago. In its place, they built a little square with playground equipment for children. I think that's beautiful. I think it's a way to transform a place of horror into a place of joy. Sometimes I pass by there and see the children playing, laughing, and I think, life goes on. Evil doesn't win forever. I'm no longer that frightened, silent girl who walked with her head down. Today, I talk. I talk my head off even. My grandchildren say Grandma never stops talking, and I laugh, because it's true. I spent so long silent that now I need to make up for it. I look back and see how far I've come. I look at this life of mine today, simple, humble, but full of love, and I feel gratitude. Gratitude for having survived, for having found good people along the way, for having built a beautiful family. My children and grandchildren are my greatest victory. They're proof that evil doesn't define us, that we can be reborn from the ashes. And you who are listening to me now know this. It doesn't matter what you've been through. It doesn't matter how deep the pit was. There's always a way out. There's always hope. I'm living proof of that. My dears, if you're listening to me now and you recognize this kind of control in your life, this fear that paralyzes you, this feeling that your voice doesn't matter, listen to what I'm going to tell you. Your voice does matter. It matters a lot. And even if someone has spent years convincing you otherwise, even if they've silenced you with threats, with fear, with manipulation, you have the right to speak. I learned that silence is the greatest weapon of those who do evil. They count on it. They count on you staying quiet, that you'll be too afraid to tell, that you'll think nobody will believe you. But you know what I discovered? When we finally open our mouths, their power ends. It's like turning on the light in a dark room. The monsters disappear. I spent years thinking I was an accomplice, that I was guilty for not speaking up sooner. And that guilt almost destroyed me. But therapy taught me something important. A victim is not an accomplice. A survivor is not guilty. I did what I needed to do to survive. And if you also stayed quiet out of fear, you're not to blame. The guilty one is whoever silenced you. Recovery doesn't happen overnight. It took me years to speak normally again. It took me even more years to believe I deserved to be happy. But you know what kept me alive? The hope that one day I could look back and see that I had won. And today, I look back, and I won. And you will win, too. If you're in a situation of control, psychological manipulation, threats, seek help. In any country where you are, there are authorities, organizations, people prepared to protect you. It could be a doctor, like it was for me. It could be a teacher, a trusted neighbor, the police. Someone will believe you. I promise someone will believe you. And for you who know someone who seems too frightened, too quiet, too controlled, ask the right questions. Insist a little more. Sometimes a person just needs someone who really looks, who sees beyond the surface. Dr. Harrison saved my life because he saw. He paid attention. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart each one of you who watched this story to the end. I know it wasn't easy to hear. It wasn't easy to tell either. But it's important. It's important so that no one else stays trapped in silence. And now I need you, my dears. If this story touched you in some way, if you know someone who needs to hear this, subscribe to this channel now and turn on the notification bell. It's important that more people hear these stories, know that liberation is possible. These stories save lives. They might even save yours or someone you love. And leave me a comment down below writing just one word. Voice. Just that word. It's so I know you watched to the end, that you understood the message. Let's create a chain of voices that refuse to stay silent. Do it now. Don't wait another minute, because maybe today you're the person who needs to hear this, or maybe you're the person who will share this with someone who needs it. And before I go, my dear friends, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What town? What city? What state? I love knowing that Grandparents' Tales reaches people from all over. It warms my heart to know our community is growing. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story moved you. It helps more people find these important stories. Thank you, my dears. May God bless each one of you. And remember, the voice you have today is the most powerful weapon against any kind of evil. Use it, always.